Hello everybody, this is John Felt. Welcome to the NCGA Valent Ag Weather Outlook for April 2nd, 2016. Now over the last week, the big rain story was over the southeast U.S., especially over the Florida Panhandle. If you look at the Midwest, you see some modest precipitation over areas, fairly widespread rain over the eastern Corn Belt from Indiana across Ohio, and then also over across the Great Lakes, which came in the form of some snow in spots. The western plains, as we've seen now for quite some time, is trending dry. You might notice I've been pointing out parts of North Dakota that really need some additional precipitation. There was a bit there, but generally speaking, not all that much. Now the areas in green had about an inch of water equivalent or rainfall in those areas. So again, Wisconsin has really been the spot. Southeast Minnesota, Wisconsin's been getting repeated precipitation, parts of Michigan as well. So that area is getting fairly wet as far as soils go. Now I said there was a bit of snow here, and you can see the areas in the brown dots there. Those received over 3 inches of snow. Overall fairly localized, but there is a bit still on the ground. This will go fairly quickly, any snow that does fall, and it'll be mainly confined to the upper Midwest and the far northern Great Lakes regions. Now let's focus on soils a bit here. Where the soils are in green, that's what I like to see as far as adequate soil moisture, the light green. To me, that's sort of the sweet spot. So what we see is over the eastern Corn Belt, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, generally it's in those first two shades of green. Now the darker green is probably where soils are trending a bit wet, but overall I think that's in fairly good shape. Now where there's problems with the wet soils is the blue and the purple. And you can see that's parts of Minnesota, more localized, but widespread Wisconsin and fairly widespread Michigan. So those are the spots where really we're having some problems with wet soils due to repeated snowfall. Now, let's keep an eye on this as I go through today's briefing. That's where we don't really want more precipitation. The Dakotas, on the other hand, you see some yellow, and that's indicating that it's dry. Parts of Kansas as well, Oklahoma, we have areas that are dry. Now, when I look at the big picture here as far as temperatures, like to focus a bit on what are the chances of getting some freezes, frost or freezes. Well, when we have this cold air still lingering over Canada, this is a source of cold air. It's widespread and it's intense. That light shade of purple is an intense. When I see that, I think the risk for spring freezes and frosts have not ended. And actually, if anything, we're vulnerable to that. So we definitely have a vulnerability to some cold air that I'll be talking about. Now this week, the dip in the jet stream, indicated in blue, is primarily a Great Lakes, Eastern Corn Belt, Eastern U.S., Northeast U.S. And we see this in the temperature average over the 5 days. You can really see a very sharp line here. So this briefing is going to be talking about milder than normal temperatures over the western sections of the Corn Belt, much colder over the Great Lakes and Northeast U.S., and also dipping down into the Eastern Corn Belt. Now, I'll give you an example of how the temperatures might look late this week. This is Friday morning for the lows, and look how far 20s actually go. So that's what I'm saying. With that cold air, we're really vulnerable. This is unusually cold air. It's going to really dominate Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, the Great Lakes states, but it's also going to sink down into parts of the Midwest as well in this region right here. And that's with that cold Arctic air and that dip in the jet stream. Now with this, we're going to have a series of lows moving from generally northwest to southeast. This is what it's going to look like through the middle part of the week, and each one of these will reinforce some colder air. So we might have some start of the week with some milder air, but as we go on, we're going to get some repeated pushes of colder air. This is what it might look like about on Wednesday. Now, as far as precipitation goes, I think most of the area is going to be a fairly quiet and uneventful week. The exception is going to be in that track of those repeated systems right through here. Look at this 1.6, 1.2, that's liquid, but this is going to come into the form of snow. So if you're looking for spring and you're in parts of eastern Minnesota, especially northeast, large parts of Wisconsin, Michigan, once again, it looks like a very wintry week with colder temperatures and a good chance of some wet snow. Now let's look a little bit further out, April 7th through 12th. We still have signs of that jet stream. This is sort of the polar low would be right in here, and we have some lobes that rotate through. Now it's going to lift a little bit further off to the east, but if you look at the temperature profile, once again, if you're in the eastern Corn Belt, generally east of the Mississippi River, we're looking at temperatures below normal. Now if you're in the central part of the Corn Belt, temperatures might be fairly close to normal, and if you're in the west, temperatures will actually be above normal. But that area of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, that looks like a second week up through 10 days now below normal temperatures. Let's go out a little bit further here. This is the 11th through 15th. That's not titled right. That's actually the 12th through the 17th of April. So now we're getting into mid-April. It finally relaxes, but there's a little bit of a lag here, so we're still looking at cool temperatures. So really, the story here does look right now as we get into spring that I don't see an early sign of really warm temperatures. I think through this next 15-day period, there will be some breaks. We will warm up some days, but I think the predominant pattern is a below normal pattern with a risk of frost or freeze over the area. Now, like I said, this is mainly the eastern Corn Belt. The western Corn Belt could get that warmer air more often. Okay, so that's temperature. Now let's talk about precipitation. As I've said before, in colder air, it's usually drier type weather. We can't get that deep moisture up. We don't see that coming up from the Gulf. So it looks like below normal precipitation except for that snow band this week. And week 2 right now also looks pretty quiet over most areas. Now, this is a pattern we've seen quite a bit, this heavy rain over the Gulf Coast, and that has been working into the eastern Corn Belt. So I wouldn't be surprised on week 2, a higher vulnerability for some heavy precipitation in this area here. Everywhere else below normal. Now, soils, these are the current soil temperatures, and as you might suspect with this frequent incursion of cold air, the warming of soils will be slower than normally would be expected. Now this was the current reading, right? Or this was last month, March 19th. Let's go a little bit further. Here's March 26th. And then let's go to the current reading here and beginning to see the real cold temperatures here. I like to look at that green line, which is 50, and it just sort of holds stable west to east. And that's not going to go too much further north with this cold air pushing south. So let's keep this in mind that this is going to be hard to push too much further north with that cold air. Okay, so here's your briefing points this week. I think the alert this week, we need to look at the Great Lakes snowfall, these bands of northwest to southeast snow. I think we're vulnerable, especially east of the Mississippi, along and east of early spring frost or freeze this week. The trends look like it's going to be a cold early spring, or at least colder than normal, especially over the eastern Corn Belt. And I think overall we're looking at below normal precipitation, except for the Great Lakes, perhaps parts of the eastern Corn Belt. If you have any questions, there's my email. Send me an email. Hope we can warm things up down the road, but at least right now it looks like more cooler than normal days than warmer than normal days. Have a great week.